The rain had been falling since early morning. Not the soft kind of rain that quietly disappears after a few minutes, but the heavy, persistent kind that makes the entire world feel gray and uncertain. Water rolled down the visor of my helmet as I slowly pulled my motorcycle onto the quiet road outside Montreal. In front of me was a journey I'd been thinking about for weeks, and somewhere ahead was the border of the United States of America. I took a deep breath. Bismillah, I whispered to myself. Moments like this always bring a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. You spend days planning, imagining how everything will go. But when the moment finally arrives, your mind begins to question everything. What if something goes wrong? What if they ask difficult questions? What if they send me back? These thoughts quietly followed me as I rolled through the wet streets of the city. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome back to The Journey. Today is a very important day. After spending almost 50 unforgettable days traveling across Canada, it's finally time to say goodbye to this beautiful country. Canada has been nothing but kind to me. From the quiet northern towns to the big, vibrant cities, every place gave me memories I will never forget. I still remember arriving in Dawson, a small town surrounded by endless wilderness. It was there that I met Hussein, a viewer who recognized me and welcomed me like a brother. Then came Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, and finally, Montreal. In every city, I was greeted with warmth, kindness, and incredible hospitality from people who had followed this journey. Sometimes it's hard to believe how far this adventure has taken me. Just a few months ago, I was riding in completely different parts of the world, and today I'm here, about to enter the United States once again. But today's ride feels different. Maybe it's the rain. Maybe it's the cold wind cutting through my gloves. Or maybe it's the quiet tension that always comes with crossing an international border. I slowly left the city behind me. The traffic lights became fewer. The tall buildings faded into smaller houses and open roads. Soon the highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon disappearing into the rain. The weather forecast had promised better conditions later in the day, but right now it didn't look very promising. Water splashed under my tires as cars rushed past me. I checked my navigation again. The border crossing wasn't very far now, but before reaching there, I wanted to make one small stop. One last stop. If you've been following this journey through Canada, then you probably know exactly where I'm going. Tim Hortons. No Canadian trip feels complete without it, and since this was my final morning in the country, I thought it would be the perfect place for one last breakfast. The warm lights of the cafe appeared through the rain like a small refuge. I parked the motorcycle outside, shook the water from my jacket, and stepped inside. The warmth instantly wrapped around me. The smell of fresh coffee and baked donuts filled the air. For a moment, the nervous thoughts about the border disappeared. I ordered a cappuccino, a donut, and a farmer's wrap with double eggs. Simple food, but perfect for a cold morning like this. As I sat by the window, watching the rain hit the pavement outside, I thought about how unpredictable travel can be. Just yesterday, I was considering staying another day in Montreal. The rain had started early in the morning, and honestly, I didn't feel like riding in weather like this. But when I checked the hotel, every room was fully booked. At first, it felt inconvenient. Now I realized maybe it was a sign that it was time to move forward. Travel has a strange way of pushing you exactly where you need to go. Sometimes the road decides for you. After finishing breakfast, I stepped outside again. The rain had slowed down slightly. Not gone, but manageable. I put on my gloves, zipped up my jacket, and started the engine. The deep rumble of the motorcycle echoed softly through the parking lot. All right, I said quietly. Let's do this. The road toward the border became more rural. The buildings grew smaller. The traffic became lighter. Soon I was riding alongside a massive river, its gray surface rippling under the wind. The St. Lawrence River. Even through the rain, it looked breathtaking. Huge bridges stretched across it, steel structures disappearing into the mist. But the road surface here was unusual. Metal sections covered parts of the bridge, and with the rain falling, my tires felt slightly unstable. I slowed down immediately. The speed limit was 50 kilometers per hour, but honestly, even that felt too fast. Every small movement of the handlebars reminded me to stay focused. This was not the place to make mistakes. After a few minutes, the bridge ended and the road returned to normal asphalt. I exhaled slowly. The closer I got to the border, the quieter everything became. Less traffic, more forests, more open land. And somewhere ahead, hidden beyond the trees and hills, was the checkpoint. The place where my entire day could either continue smoothly or become very complicated. Border crossings are strange moments. You never know exactly what will happen. Sometimes officers wave you through in a few minutes. Other times they ask dozens of questions. Sometimes they even ask you to step aside for additional inspection. Every traveler has experienced that moment of uncertainty. And right now, I was only a few kilometers away from it. My hands tightened slightly on the handlebars as the first border signs appeared along the road. Large green boards announcing the approach of the United States border. A strange feeling ran through me. Excitement, nervousness, curiosity, all at the same time. The rain started falling harder again, almost as if the weather itself understood the tension of the moment. Soon I could see the checkpoint buildings in the distance, a long road leading toward the inspection booths. Only a few vehicles were waiting in line. That was a good sign. Fewer cars meant less waiting, but it also meant the officers would have more time to question each traveler. I slowed the motorcycle and joined the short line. One car stood in front of me, just one. My heart began beating a little faster. I checked my documents once more. Passport, visa, motorcycle registration. Everything was ready. But still, the nervous feeling remained. The car ahead slowly moved forward. Then it stopped at the officer's window. I watched carefully as the officer spoke with the driver. A few seconds passed. Then the car drove away. Now, it was my turn. I rolled the motorcycle forward and stopped in front of the border officer. The officer looked at me, then at the motorcycle, then back at me again. For a brief moment, neither of us said anything. Then he leaned slightly toward the window and asked the first question. "Good morning. Where are you coming from?" And as I lifted my visor to answer him, I suddenly realized something that made the situation even more complicated. Because the truth was, my journey before arriving here included several countries that U.S. border officers usually ask many questions about. And if I told him everything honestly, this quick border crossing could suddenly become a very long conversation. I took a small breath and began to answer, and that's when the officer looked at my passport again and said something unexpected. I took a small breath and began to answer, and that's when the officer looked at my passport again and said something unexpected. "Where do you live?" His voice was calm but direct. "Germany," I replied. He nodded slightly, still flipping through the pages of my passport. For a moment, the only sound between us was the rain hitting the metal roof above the checkpoint. Then his eyes moved from the passport to my motorcycle. "That your bike?" "Yes, sir," I answered quickly. He leaned a little closer, clearly interested. "American plate? But you live in Germany?" I smiled slightly behind my visor. "Yes. I bought the motorcycle here in the United States." For a second, his expression changed from neutral to curious. "Really?" "Yes, sir." That seemed to catch his attention. He straightened up in his chair and looked again at the bike parked in front of the booth, water dripping from the sides of the luggage boxes. "How does that work?" he asked. "You're a tourist, right?" "Yes." "And tourists can buy motorcycles here?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. It's allowed." It was actually cheaper for me to buy one here instead of shipping my own bike from Europe. He leaned back slightly, thinking about it. Interesting. The word hung in the air for a moment. Then he looked at the computer screen inside the booth and typed something quickly. The rain outside was getting heavier again. I could feel the cold wind pushing against my jacket as I waited. Moments like this always feel longer than they really are. Even though only a few seconds pass, your mind starts imagining every possible outcome. Would he ask me to park the bike and go inside the inspection building? Would they search my luggage? Would they ask about every country I'd visited during this journey? I stayed calm and waited. Finally, he looked up again. "So, where are you headed today?" "Lake Placid," I answered. "Lake Placid?" he repeated. "Yes, sir." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "That's a nice place." Then he asked another question. "When was the last time you were in the United States?" I thought for a moment. "About 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks? "Yes, I crossed into Michigan earlier during the trip." He nodded again and typed something else into the computer. The rain was now coming down hard again, creating small streams of water running across the pavement between the booths. I could feel the cold creeping into my fingers inside my gloves. The officer seemed to notice. He looked at the gray sky above us and shook his head. "Man, this is a miserable day for a ride." I laughed softly. "Yes, sir. It definitely is." He smiled slightly. "How long are you planning to stay in the United States this time?" "About 20 days. And after that, I'll continue south toward Mexico." That answer made him pause. "Mexico?" "Yes." "On the motorcycle?" "Yes, sir." For a moment, he simply looked at me. Not suspiciously, more like he was trying to imagine the journey himself. "That's a long ride," he said. "Yes." "Where did you start?" "Alaska." His eyebrows lifted again. "Alaska?" "Yes." The curiosity in his expression was now very clear. So you rode from Alaska all the way through Canada, and now you're heading to Mexico. That's the plan. He shook his head slowly, almost impressed. That's quite the trip. For a moment, the conversation felt less like an interrogation and more like two travelers discussing a long adventure. Then he asked another question. When did you buy the bike? I bought it in Alaska around mid-August. And you've been riding it ever since? Yes. He leaned slightly out of the booth window to look again at the motorcycle. Rainwater glistened on the metal frame and the saddlebags. Nice bike, he said. Thank you, sir. Then he pointed toward the handlebars. You got heated grips on that thing? Yes, I do. He nodded approvingly. You're going to need them today. Another few seconds passed while he looked at the screen again. Inside my helmet, I stayed completely still. Even though the conversation had been friendly so far, the nervous feeling was still there. Because one question could change everything. And there was one thing I hadn't mentioned yet. During this journey, I'd visited several countries that sometimes raise extra questions at U.S. border crossings. Iran, Iraq, Syria. I hadn't lied about anything, but I also hadn't volunteered that information unless someone asked directly. Sometimes, the less complicated the conversation stays, the better. The officer looked back at me one more time. How long have you been traveling? Several months. And you're doing this alone? Yes. He nodded slowly again. Then he closed the passport. That small movement immediately caught my attention. He tapped the passport lightly against the counter, then handed it back to me. All right, my friend. My heart skipped a beat. You're all set. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I heard him correctly. All set? Yes. He smiled. Welcome to the United States. The tension that had been sitting quietly in my chest disappeared instantly. Thank you very much, sir. He gave a small wave. Ride safe out there. And hopefully you'll warm up soon. I hope so. I laughed. I lowered my visor again and carefully rolled the motorcycle forward. Just like that. I'd crossed the border. No secondary inspection. No complicated questions. No long delays. Just a friendly conversation and a smooth entry. As I rode past the checkpoint buildings, a sign appeared on the side of the road. Welcome to the United States of America. A smile spread across my face inside the helmet. The cold wind hit me immediately as I accelerated onto the highway, but somehow it didn't feel as uncomfortable anymore. Crossing borders always brings a special feeling. It's the moment when one chapter of a journey ends and another begins. Behind me was Canada. Ahead of me was the United States. But as I continued riding south through the rain, I realized that the real surprise of the day was still waiting just a few miles ahead. Because once the road left the highway and began winding through the forests of northern New York, the landscape around me suddenly transformed into something absolutely breathtaking. And what I saw next on that road was something I will probably never forget. And what I saw next on that road was something I will probably never forget. The moment the highway curved into the countryside of northern New York, the scenery around me began to change in a way that almost felt unreal. Just minutes ago, I had been focused on border questions, passports, and nervous thoughts. Now suddenly, I was surrounded by color. Everywhere I looked, the trees were exploding with autumn shades, deep red, bright orange, golden yellow, and patches of green still holding on before winter arrived. The rain had softened into a light mist, and the clouds hung low over the hills, creating a dramatic backdrop that made the colors appear even richer. I slowed the motorcycle slightly, not because of traffic, but because I wanted to take it all in. This region of the United States and Canada is famous around the world for its autumn season. People travel from thousands of miles away just to witness this transformation. But seeing it in person, while riding through it on a motorcycle, was something completely different. Every curve in the road revealed a new scene. A small wooden farmhouse sitting quietly among red maple trees. A narrow country road disappearing into a tunnel of orange leaves. A peaceful lake reflecting the colors of the forest like a giant mirror. It almost felt like riding through a painting. For a moment, I forgot about the cold weather. I forgot about the rain. I forgot about the long miles ahead. Travel sometimes gives you moments like this. Moments where time slows down and everything feels perfectly aligned. The road continued winding through hills and forests. Occasionally, a small village appeared with a few houses, a gas station, maybe a tiny cafe. Most of the time, though, it was just open countryside. Quiet, peaceful, and incredibly beautiful. After about 30 minutes of riding, I noticed a sign on the side of the road. Ausable Chasm. Curious, I slowed down and pulled into a small parking area. If you're traveling through unfamiliar places, sometimes the best experiences happen when you simply follow your curiosity. I parked the motorcycle, removed my helmet, and immediately felt the cool air against my face. The temperature had dropped significantly. My breath was visible in the cold morning air, but the view in front of me made it completely worth it. A deep canyon stretched below a small viewing platform, carved by thousands of years of rushing water. At the bottom, a river flowed between steep rock walls, and a small waterfall cascaded down over the stones. But what truly made the scene magical were the colors. The canyon was surrounded by dense forest, and the autumn leaves painted the entire landscape with vibrant shades. Orange leaves hanging above dark rock cliffs, red branches stretching toward the sky, yellow reflections dancing on the surface of the water. I stood there quietly for several minutes, just taking it all in. Sometimes during long journeys, you move so quickly from one place to another that you forget to pause and appreciate where you are. But places like this remind you why you travel in the first place. Not just to reach destinations, but to experience moments. After spending some time exploring the viewpoint and capturing a few photos, I checked the map again. My destination for today wasn't far away. Lake Placid, a small town hidden deep in the Adirondack Mountains. And if the name sounds familiar, there's a reason. Lake Placid has hosted the Winter Olympics twice. Once in 1932, and again in 1980. It's one of those places where nature and history come together in a unique way. According to my navigation, it was only about 37 miles away, less than an hour of riding, but the road leading there promised something special. As I started the motorcycle again and pulled back onto the road, the weather continued playing its strange game. The rain would appear suddenly for 5 or 10 minutes, then disappear again just as quickly. Sunlight would briefly break through the clouds, lighting up the autumn leaves like glowing flames. Then the sky would darken again, and the mist would return. Oddly enough, this changing weather made the landscape even more dramatic. Every shift in light transformed the scenery. Sometimes the forest looked mysterious and dark. Other times it looked bright and vibrant. As the road climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped further. The display on my motorcycle showed only 5 degrees Celsius. And when you're riding at highway speed, the wind makes it feel even colder. My heated grips were working hard to keep my hands warm. I pulled my jacket collar higher and continued riding. Soon the road became narrower and more winding. Small lakes appeared between the trees. Tiny wooden cabins sat quietly along the shoreline. Occasionally I passed cyclists, hikers, or other travelers who had come to experience the famous Adirondack autumn. Everyone seemed to be enjoying the same magical moment. Then something unexpected appeared in the sky. A faint rainbow. At first it was barely visible through the mist, but as the sunlight pushed through the clouds, the colors slowly became clearer. A perfect arc stretching across the valley ahead. I couldn't help but smile. Moments like this feel almost symbolic, as if the road itself is rewarding you for pushing through the difficult parts of the journey. The rain, the cold, the nervous border crossing, all of it now felt worth it. After another 20 minutes of riding, the trees began to thin slightly, and I saw the first signs welcoming visitors to the town. Welcome to Lake Placid. The road curved gently around a beautiful lake reflecting the cloudy sky. Small hotels, restaurants, and shops lined the streets. Even though the town was quiet today, it had a warm, welcoming atmosphere. I slowed down and followed the navigation toward my hotel. The ride had been cold, wet, and emotionally exhausting, but also incredibly rewarding. As I pulled into the parking area of the small lodge where I had booked a room earlier that day, I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. The sudden silence after hours of riding felt almost strange. My hands were still slightly numb from the cold, but inside, I felt calm, relieved, and grateful. Because the day that had started with heavy rain and nervous thoughts at the border had slowly transformed into one of the most beautiful rides of the entire journey. I removed my helmet, stretched my stiff shoulders, and looked toward the entrance of the lodge. Now it was finally time to check in, warm up, and rest after a long day on the road. But as I walked toward the reception desk, I had no idea that the small mountain town of Lake Placid was about to give me one more memorable surprise before the day was over. And that surprise would begin the moment I stepped inside the hotel lobby. And that surprise would begin the moment I stepped inside the hotel lobby. The warmth hit me immediately. After hours of riding through cold rain and mountain air, stepping into a heated building felt almost luxurious. My gloves were damp, my jacket was slightly wet, and I could feel the stiffness in my shoulders from riding in the cold wind. The lobby itself was small but cozy. Wooden walls, soft yellow lighting, and a fireplace quietly crackling in the corner. It felt less like a hotel and more like someone's mountain cabin. Behind the front desk stood a middle-aged man with a friendly smile. "Long ride today?" he asked the moment he saw me walk in wearing motorcycle gear. I laughed softly. You could say that. He nodded as if he understood immediately. Let me guess. Cold and rainy? Exactly. He handed me a towel so I could wipe some of the water from my helmet visor. Welcome to Lake Placid, he said. Even the way he said it made the place feel welcoming. I checked in, showed my booking confirmation, and within a few minutes he handed me the room key. One night? Yes. Good choice stopping here tonight, he added. The weather gets even colder after sunset. That didn't surprise me at all. Outside it was already around 5 degrees Celsius, and once the sun disappeared behind the mountains, it would feel even colder. I carried my luggage inside and opened the door to my room, and honestly, it was better than I expected. 2 large beds, clean white sheets, a big window overlooking the quiet street outside. Everything was simple but comfortable. For a small mountain town like this, it felt perfect. I placed my helmet on the table and finally sat down for a moment. My body instantly relaxed. Riding a motorcycle for hours in cold weather drains your energy more than you realize. Your muscles stay tense, your mind stays alert, and the wind constantly pushes against your body. But sitting inside that warm room, all of that tension slowly began to fade. I checked my phone for a moment and looked at the price of the room again. $130 for the night. For a popular tourist town like Lake Placid, especially during autumn season, that was actually a reasonable price. Tourists come here from all over the world to see the fall colors and enjoy the mountain scenery. Many of the hotels were much more expensive. I stood up and looked outside the window again. The sky had turned darker, and the clouds were slowly covering the mountains. The rain had stopped for now, but the cold air was still moving through the town. At that moment, my stomach reminded me of something important. I hadn't eaten much all day. Just the farmer's wrap, donut, and coffee from Tim Hortons earlier that morning. And after riding in cold weather for hours, hunger always arrives suddenly. So I decided to go out again for a quick dinner. I put on my jacket, grabbed my wallet, and stepped outside. The town of Lake Placid felt peaceful in the evening. Small restaurants, cafes, and shops lined the main street. Most of them had warm lights glowing through the windows. It felt like the kind of place where people come to relax, escape busy cities, and enjoy nature. After walking for a few minutes, I found a small pizza place nearby. Simple, warm, and exactly what I needed. I ordered a mushroom pizza and waited near the counter. The smell of fresh pizza filled the entire restaurant, making the wait feel longer than it actually was. After about 10 minutes, the pizza was ready. I carried the warm box back to the hotel and sat down at the small table in my room. At that moment, it honestly felt like the best meal in the world. When you've been riding all day in cold weather and your stomach is empty, even simple food tastes incredible. The first slice was perfect, hot, fresh, exactly what I needed. I leaned back in the chair, took another bite, and thought about the day. Just that morning, I'd been riding through heavy rain toward the border, feeling nervous and uncertain about what would happen. Border crossings always bring a small amount of stress. You never fully know how the conversation will go. You don't know what questions might be asked, and sometimes a single answer can change everything. But today, things had gone smoothly. The officer had been friendly. The questions had been simple, and within minutes, I had entered the United States without any complications. Now, sitting in a warm room in the mountains of New York, eating pizza after a long ride, the entire day felt like a success. But as I finished the last slice and looked outside at the quiet street below, I realized something else. The journey was far from over. Because tomorrow, the road would continue south. Because tomorrow, the road would continue south. That thought stayed in my mind as I sat near the window of the hotel room, watching the quiet streets of Lake Placid slowly settle into the calm of the evening. The small town looked peaceful under the dim streetlights. A few cars passed occasionally. Couples walked along the sidewalks wearing warm jackets, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the faint sound of wind moving through the trees. It was one of those quiet travel moments when you finally have time to reflect on everything that happened during the day. Travel isn't always about reaching famous landmarks or taking perfect photos. Sometimes the most memorable parts of a journey are the simple moments: a warm coffee during a cold morning, a friendly conversation with a stranger, a quiet road surrounded by autumn colors, or even the feeling of relief after successfully crossing an international border. Earlier that day, as I waited in line at the checkpoint, my mind had been filled with questions. Would the officer ask about every country I'd visited? Would the process take hours? Would I have to unpack my entire motorcycle for inspection? Those thoughts are natural when you're traveling across borders, especially on a long international journey. But sometimes things turn out much simpler than we imagine. The officer had been curious about the motorcycle, curious about the journey, but most importantly, he had been kind. That simple conversation at the border reminded me of something important. When you travel with respect and honesty, most people respond the same way. Kindness often travels farther than fear. I finished my drink and stood up, stretching my arms after the long day. My body was tired. Riding in the cold weather had drained my energy more than I realized, but it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes after a meaningful day on the road. Before going to sleep, I stepped outside for a moment. The cold mountain air immediately wrapped around me again. The temperature had dropped even lower now. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were slowly clearing, revealing small patches of stars above the dark mountains. Somewhere beyond those mountains, tomorrow's road was waiting. More towns, more landscapes, more stories. This is what makes motorcycle travel so addictive. Every day begins with uncertainty. You never know exactly what you will experience, but every day ends with memories that stay with you forever. Standing there in the quiet night air of Lake Placid, I realized that this journey had already given me countless unforgettable moments. From the remote roads of Alaska, to the endless wilderness of Canada, to the colorful forests of northern New York. And this was only one chapter of the adventure. Tomorrow the ride would continue deeper into the United States. Eventually the road would lead even farther south, toward new countries, new cultures, and new experiences waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. I took one last look at the peaceful street before heading back inside. The warmth of the hotel room welcomed me again. I placed my helmet on the table, turned off the lights, and lay down on the bed. Outside, the cold wind continued moving through the mountains, but inside, everything was quiet. And as sleep slowly took over, one final thought crossed my mind. Sometimes the moments that make us the most nervous, like standing in front of a border officer with a passport in your hand, turn out to be the moments that open the door to the next incredible part of the journey. And tomorrow morning, that next chapter would begin. Good night from Lake Placid, and as always, remember me in your prayers. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until the next ride, take care.